The Fires of Caldarus by David C. Simon. Chapter 1. The Running Girl. The accused man knelt on the wooden platform, blindfolded with his hands tied behind his back. His dull grey work clothes were ragged and water-stained, his long black hair dripping wet. A dozen wardens stood on either side of the accused, their white robes and gleaming steel breastplates contrasting with the dirty, drab man they loomed over. 4 held ornately decorated halberds, the rest were armed with flintlock pistols or muskets. A crowd had gathered in Victory Square to watch the gruesome spectacle. Mostly men and women on their way to work or market, and mostly Therians, like the accused, with copper-toned skin and dark hair. Namara kept a distance, keeping to the shadows cast by Vigil House in the early morning sun. Her pale skin and fair hair easily identified her as Othlari, like the wardens, and she didn't want to be singled out for retribution by angry Therians. But then again, she didn't want to draw the attention of the wardens either. There was nothing she could do. A hush fell across the crowd as a large, balding man stepped onto the platform. He too wore pure white robes and carried a pair of flintlock pistols on his belt. Namara shuddered as the Castellan, commander of the wardens, turned to face the crowd. "Loyal citizens of the Othlari Empire!" the Castellan bellowed, his voice echoing off the brick buildings that surrounded the square. "The blessings of the Three do not come without a price. That price is steadfast vigilance against the Deceiver and his dragon-blooded thralls. This man," he gestured dramatically at the accused, "has been found to carry the Deceiver's taint." Gasps swept through the crowd, and a woman cried out in dismay. Namara's stomach tightened. She knew what was about to happen. The Castellan turned to the accused. "Eldwain Tor, do you renounce the Deceiver and commit yourself, mind, body, and soul, to a life of penitence?" The crowd was deathly silent as the accused mouthed something inaudible. At a gesture from the Castellan, a warden removed a long branding iron from a cauldron of hot coals. The 2 wardens nearest to the accused grabbed him by the upper arms, while a third yanked his head back and pulled his hair away from his forehead. He was young, only a few years older than Namara by the looks of him. Even from this distance, Namara could see that his eye had been blackened and his nose bloodied. He desperately scanned the crowd, searching for one last glimpse of family or loved ones before the wardens took him away. For a moment, she thought his eyes settled on hers, and the look of contempt that he gave her sent a chill down Namara's spine. Was it hatred for Othlari that burned behind his eyes? Was it the uniform she wore? Or did he recognize something else inside her, a secret that could see her condemned to the same fate? His face was blocked from view as the warden with the branding iron loomed over him. A sharp, cracking sound, like breaking glass, startled Namara. She spun her head and saw that a long crack had suddenly appeared in the window behind her. Panicked, she looked back at the crowd, but they were all focused on the branding. She had to get out of there before someone noticed her. Moving calmly and casually, Namara turned and started to walk away from the gruesome show. Nice and slowly, 1 foot after the other, just like a normal person. Behind her, the man screamed as the branding iron met his forehead, and Namara burst into a run. After only 2 weeks in the city of Caldarus, Namara had already earned the nickname of the Running Girl. She'd overheard gossip in the marketplace about the tall, eccentric, blonde teenager regularly seen hurtling through the streets at first light. As nicknames went, she liked it. It was better than a lot of the things the locals could have been calling her. Namara started most days with a morning run. It was exhilarating, but it was also her job. As a runner for the city vigil, she was responsible for collecting and delivering messages throughout the city. She ran in her watchman uniform, black boots, black trousers, a white shirt, and a black leather belt. Over it all, she wore a mustard-coloured jacket with silver buttons. She kept her left hand on the handle of her small sword sheathed on her belt to stop the scabbard from batting against her legs as she ran. Her shoulder-length blonde hair was tied back in a ponytail. She passed a column of maybe 24 soldiers, all men, parading in red coats with their muskets shouldered. Their commanding officer glared at her as she ran past. The sight of a uniformed girl with a sword must have riled him up. Namara took some guilty pleasure at his irritation. While she had no interest in joining the army, it irked her that she couldn't, even if she wanted to. Maybe she should have thrown a salute his way, she thought, just to see him flinch. The mental image proved distracting enough that she almost ran straight into a drake and couldn't stop herself from letting out a yelp as she swerved out of its way. The massive creature, almost 3 times the size of a horse and covered in olive-green, scaly hide, reared up in alarm and snorted at her. Some of the goods packed on the oversized cart that the drake was pulling toppled to the ground. A merchant pulled on the drake's bridle to calm it down and shouted something at Namara in a language she didn't understand. She kept running and threw an awkward "sorry" over her shoulder. If her heart hadn't already been beating double pace, it certainly was now. She'd seen a couple of drakes from a distance since arriving in the city of Caldarus, but this had been her first close encounter with one. The lands beyond the city walls supposedly contained vast herds of these monsters. Just another reminder of how far from home she was now. She came to a watchtower where a watchman waited for her arrival. On seeing Namara's approach, he produced a rolled and sealed piece of paper that he handed to her without a word. She nodded, he nodded, and she turned and started jogging to take the overnight report back to Vigil House. She liked that particular watchman. No useless chatter, just business. She looked at the shadows cast by the morning sun and realized that, once again, she had given herself more time than necessary. This was the only report she needed to collect before breakfast, and that was still some time away. So she slowed down to a more casual walk. Her heart continued to race, her mind still distracted. Nobody saw, she told herself. It's all right, stay calm. Don't do anything stupid. Like break a window, run from the wardens, and nearly headbutt a drake. She gazed longingly across Lowtown towards the supply fleet anchored in the harbour. Almost a dozen galleons, plus escorting warships bristling with cannons and Imperial Marines. 2 weeks ago, she couldn't wait to get off her galleon and feel solid, unswaying land under her feet again, but there had been no drakes at sea, no wardens on the transport, and no Therians to glare accusingly at her. Sure, the 4-month journey had been filled with seasickness and tedium, but at least it had been simple and relatively safe. Rather than returning directly to Vigil House, Namara decided to take a much longer route to give herself more time to calm down. She cut eastwards through the back alleys and hidden paths, making note of minor landmarks so she could get a proper lay of the land. As a runner, it was vital that she knew the layout of the city as intimately as possible. As she walked, Namara heard the sound of teenage boys laughing, and it immediately raised alarm bells in her mind. It wasn't playful laughter. It was mocking and cruel. As a 15-year-old girl who preferred weapons training and trousers to embroidery and skirts, she'd been on the receiving end of that kind of laughter often enough back in the capital. She should probably just leave it alone, she thought. It wasn't any of her business. Immediately she waved those thoughts aside like irritating flies and followed the sound down an alley. Halfway down the alley, she saw 3 teenaged boys standing around a young, distressed girl. She couldn't have been older than 12 or 13, and the boys towered over her menacingly. Judging by their dark hair and ruddy skin, they were all Therians, as was the girl. The girl tried to move away from the boys. One of them stepped in front of her and crossed his arms, grinning wickedly. But instead of stopping, the girl just collided with him and fell backwards into the dust of the road. The boys laughed again. "Stop it!" the girl shouted, her voice surprisingly powerful, but her desperation unmistakable. She stood up and tried to escape in a different direction. Another of the boys stepped in front of her, and once again, instead of stopping, she ran right into him and fell backwards with a cry of alarm. Then Namara understood. The girl was blind. Something snapped in Namara's mind. She hated bullies at the best of times, but picking on a blind girl? She couldn't let that stand. She strode forward until she was about 10 yards from them. "All right, you've had your fun. Leave the girl in peace." The boys all stopped and looked at her. The girl just froze where she was on the ground. One of the bullies, a stocky kid with a round face and the first hints of a beard, held a wooden baton about 2 feet long. He stopped laughing. "What are you supposed to be?" Namara gulped. In the capital, the uniform was normally enough to command some degree of respect. Here, not so much, apparently. She might have just made a big mistake. No, she had to remember what her father said. Half of the job is just seeming confident. Watchmen needed to know the art of bluffing. "Don't make this awkward." Namara forced a wry grin and hoped it looked convincing. "Just walk away." The other 2 bullies looked at each other nervously, but the stocky one seemed unperturbed. In a fair fight, the 3 of them could probably overpower her in a matter of seconds. She was fit and she was fast, and she knew the basics of how to defend herself, but there's only so much one person can do against 3 hulking walls of meat. Which is why Namara was glad it wasn't a fair fight. She rested her left hand on the hilt of her sword, just to get the message across. Bullies were generally content to get a little roughed up if it meant proving their manliness, but there was a big difference between a black eye and a bleeding chest wound. "She's a watchman," another bully, tall and lean, said. "Let's go." The 3rd bully, short with ratty hair, snickered. "Watchman, watchwoman, watchdog." The stocky bully with the baton stepped towards Namara and sneered. "This is none of your business, dog. Go home unless you want a bloody nose." Namara sneered back and pulled her sword out just an inch. Seriously. The stocky one gripped the end of his baton like a club and took another step forward, but the tall one grabbed his shoulder and said something in Therian. The stocky one shook the other off and continued to advance. "I don't have to take orders from dogs like you," he spat at her. Damn. Namara had miscalculated. This guy wasn't a bully. He was a thug. And possibly drunk. She quickly drew her sword and stepped into a duelist's stance, side on, with her right hand holding the sword ahead and her left arm behind her for balance. The thug adopted no such stance. He just gripped the baton with both hands and raised it over his shoulder. "Come on," he said wickedly. "Ladies first." She maintained her stance and said nothing. No way she was going to let this idiot goad her into striking first. "Well," the thug said, "I gave you a chance." He yelled as he ran at her. Chapter 2. The Blind Mage. As a child, Namara had grown up surrounded by the watchmen of the vigil, and one of her favourite pastimes had been watching them practice their swordplay. After her mother died, some of the watchmen let her join in, with wooden training swords, to humour the poor kid and take her mind off her loss. Once Namara declared that she wanted to become a watchman, they stopped humouring her and started sparring with her in earnest. By the time she took her vows and donned the uniform, she already knew more than most teenagers about surviving a real fight. She wasn't an expert duelist by any standard, but she knew how to use a sword. As the thug ran at her, Namara hoped that all that practice was about to pay off. The thug swung his baton at her head. Instead of attempting to block the blow, she twisted her body and battered his weapon aside with her sword. He hadn't expected that move, and his momentum carried him past her so that he lost his footing. Namara quickly took a step away from him and returned to her duelist stance, waiting for his next move. He righted himself and glared at her. He had weight and strength, but she had reach and training. Theoretically she had the upper hand, but he also had friends, and if they decided to rush to his aid, she didn't like her chances at all. She needed to find a way to shut this idiot down quickly without seriously hurting him. The thug moved forward more cautiously this time, adopting a stance not unlike her own and wielding the baton like a sword. He lunged at her face, and she had to overcome the panic that the move induced to parry the blow. He responded by grabbing her sword arm with his free hand. No fair, the watchman had never done that. Namara felt the urge to panic grow. This was no gentleman's duel, this was raw, unconstrained violence like she had never experienced before. She grabbed his right arm in the same way as he had grabbed hers, and immediately realized she had made a mistake. Now his greater body weight came into play as they wrestled for control. and she felt herself losing the struggle already. Any moment now, her muscles would give out, she'd be flat on her back, and he'd be able to pin her down. So she decided to fall on her own terms. She let go of his right arm and pulled her own right arm towards her. It caught him by surprise, and he fell forward. As he fell, Namara used his weight to swing herself around him like a ball on the end of a string, and pushed against his back with a free hand. He let go of her to use his hands to protect his face as he hit the paving stones. On the ground, he quickly rolled over and was about to stand when he found Namara's sword hovering above his throat. "Don't," Namara panted between breaths. He glared at her but growled. "Fine, I yield." She stepped back and gave him room to stand, but kept the blade close enough to maintain her advantage. He groggily pushed himself to his feet with the baton. He then spat on the ground, turned and stormed away, swearing under his breath. The other two followed. Namara waited until the three of them were out of sight before sheathing her sword. Her heart was beating so hard that she could feel it in her throat. The blind girl was still sitting dejectedly on the ground. "You all right?" Namara asked. "Aushki," the girl said, and sniffed quietly. It wasn't a word that Namara knew. Indeed, Namara knelt in front of the girl so she could see her face clearly. The girl didn't make eye contact. It was a sweet face, soft and round, with short, curly brown hair down to her chin. Her dark green eyes stared vacantly at nothing. "You're blind, aren't you?" Namara asked. The girl nodded. "Uh-huh." "Is someone taking care of you?" "My brother." "Where is he?" She grimaced. "I kind of gave him the slip." Namara grinned. "Thanks for helping," the girl said. "Those guys were Aushki." "What does that mean?" "Oh," the girl blushed. "It's, kind of rude. They're not nice people. I'm Brianna, by the way." She started patting the ground around her with her hands. "I'm Namara," she answered. "You looking for something?" "My cane," Brianna said. "Oh, crap." Namara said. "Is it about this long? About 2 feet long, made of wood?" "That's the one." "Sorry, the guy who fought me took it. I didn't know it was yours." Brianna sighed. "Aushki." "Here, let me help you up." Brianna held out her arm and Namara reached down to pull her up. As they touched, Namara felt the strangest sensation, a sudden tightness that spread quickly from the tips of her fingers right up to her shoulder. Her hand clamped down hard on Brianna's, and then her whole arm went numb. The shock made Namara jump back and release her grip. Brianna fell back down into the dust. Sorry, Namara said. She looked at her right hand and flexed her fingers. The numbness started to fade, but there was still a sharp, tingling sensation running up and down her arm. Her heart was pounding faster than ever, and she felt a tightness across her chest. "I don't know what happened," Namara started, but as she looked at Brianna, she stopped. Brianna, still on the ground, had almost frozen. Her lips were quivering, and she was breathing quickly. She hadn't looked half so terrified when the bullies had her surrounded. "Hey," Namara said softly, kneeling down in front of Brianna. "You all right?" "Please," Brianna stammered. "Please don't." Her voice trailed off. "Don't what?" Namara asked. "Don't turn me into the wardens," Brianna said. "Please, I don't want to be branded." Namara blinked. She looked up and down the alley, making sure that no one was close enough to overhear her, and then leaned in close to Brianna. "You're a mage?" Namara whispered. Brianna flinched at the sound of Namara's voice, but she didn't answer. She was petrified of fear. "It's all right," Namara said. "I'm not going to turn you in." You're not?" Brianna stammered. "Promise," Namara said. "I tried to keep as far away from the wardens as possible." "But," Brianna furrowed her brow. "How? You're a hound, aren't you?" Namara shuddered. Hound was a term commonly used to describe the penitent, mages who had been branded like the man she had seen earlier. Effectively enslaved by the wardens, they were forced to help them hunt down other mages. "I'm not a hound," Namara said. "But you're Othlari," Brianna said. "Yes." "And you're a mage." "Yeah," Namara said, "but the wardens don't know that. Not yet, anyway." Brianna bit her lip and thought it over. She then reached forward with both her hands. "Let me feel your face." Namara had never been particularly keen on people touching her, not since her mother died. There was a level of intimacy associated with physical touch which she just wasn't comfortable with. But Brianna was blind. These were very special circumstances. "All right." Namara guided Brianna's hands to her face. Brianna gently felt out Namara's facial features, her cheeks, her nose, her chin, her jaw, and finally her forehead. Namara wanted to pull away, but forced herself to be still as Brianna's fingertips ran across her forehead over and over again. "See?" Namara said, immediately regretting the choice of word. "No, but yeah, no brand." "No brand," Namara repeated. Brianna's relief was palpable. She dropped her arms, rolled her head back, and let out a huge sigh. "You all right?" Namara asked. "Kind of spooked." Brianna let out an awkward laugh. "Sorry if I scared you. How did you know that I'm a mage?" "The zappy thing when we touched," Brianna said, "happens when a mage doesn't practice a lot. Stings, doesn't it?" "Yeah." Namara flexed her fingers. The tightness in her arm and chest had finally gone. "Shall we try again?" Brianna asked, stretching her arm out again. Namara hesitated. "No zap this time," Brianna said. "You've already let it all out. Through me. You're welcome, by the way." Namara pulled Brianna up to her feet, and this time there was no arm-numbing shock. "Thanks." Brianna brushed her hands together, trying to get rid of the dust she had accumulated. She was slim and short, tiny really, the top of her head not even reaching Namara's shoulders, though at 5'10" Namara was used to being taller than most people her age. Brianna's big green eyes stared vacantly at nothing while she tried to unruffle her skirt. She achieved little. Brianna turned to the left, then to the right, apparently listening for something. She frowned, then said, I'm all turned around. Walk me to school?" Human interaction. This is far from what Namara had been looking for this morning. Namara's first instinct was to make an excuse, to explain that her father was expecting her home for breakfast soon. Strictly speaking, it was true. But it was hard to refuse the tiny girl in the dusty skirt with the big, green, albeit vacant, eyes. Besides, Brianna was the first free mage Namara had ever met. This might be her first and only real chance to learn more about magic. Namara's silence must have made Brianna nervous because she cleared her throat and said, "Please?" "Of course," Namara said. Brianna grinned and offered her hand. Namara took it and started walking towards Victory Square. "So," Brianna said, "that was your first zap?" Namara nodded. "I've never met another mage before." "Ouch, that must really suck." Namara looked at Brianna. "You know other mages?" Brianna bit her lip. Well... "It's all right, you probably shouldn't talk about them. Safer that way." "Yeah," Brianna said thoughtfully. They walked in silence for a minute, and Namara started noticing the odd looks that passers-by were giving them. A tall, fair-skinned Othlari walking hand in hand with a tiny Therian. "You're new in Caldarus?" Brianna asked as they walked. "That's right, just 2 weeks off the boat." "Where'd you come from?" "The capital," Namara said. "Ooh," Brianna cooed. "Of Othlari, you mean? The Silver City?" "It's mostly stone, really." Brianna shrugged her shoulders. "All looks the same to me, anyway." Namara let herself laugh at that. Brianna beamed. "So what brought you here? Besides the boat, I mean," Brianna asked. "My dad," Namara said. "Well, his work. Must really suck leaving all your friends behind." "I guess," Namara said. Not that she really had many friends in the capital. She'd always preferred the company of books and maps. She lowered her voice. "But the capital is probably the worst place in the Empire for, well, people like us. Dad thinks I'm safer here." Never know, I might even learn something. Brianna slowed to a stop and furrowed her brow. What? Namara asked. You really want that? Want what? To learn about people like us, what we can do. Namara's heart started to race. She wanted to shout, yes, it's all I want, but stopped herself from attracting unwanted attention and instead managed a calm, restrained, yes, I do. Brianna looked conflicted for a moment before making up her mind. She started walking again. You should meet my brother, Brianna said. Where can I find you later? Namara didn't want to reveal where she lived, not yet anyway. How about I find you? Namara asked. Brianna mulled that over as they walked. Fair enough, Namara thought. Brianna had every reason to be cautious. They came to Victory Square, a grand cobblestone space, roughly 150 yards by 200. The crowd from that morning's branding had cleared, as had the wardens, but the square was still a hub of activity. It was a common meeting place for the locals and was lined with some of the more prominent buildings in the city, such as the chapel, the council chambers, and a popular tavern. The school itself was on the southern side of the square, opposite where Namara and Brianna were standing. It was modest in size, just a single story high. We're almost there, Namara said. Uh-huh, Brianna nodded absently. Brianna! A male voice called out from across the square. Namara looked up and saw a young man, probably in his late teens, jogging across the square towards them. He wore a grey slashed doublet with black breeches and white stockings. More respectable than the average worker, but still quite modest compared to the wealthy nobles up in Hightown. His hair was short and black, and his thinly bearded face was soft and round. He was slim and only a few inches shorter than Namara, which was tall for a Therian. Friend of yours? Namara asked. My brother, Brianna sighed. He'll be angry that I gave him the slip. Brianna's brother stopped a few feet short of them and gasped for air. Brianna, I really wish you'd stop doing that. Brianna grinned wickedly. You know that only makes me want to do it more. He looked at Namara, his face neutral. Thank you for seeing her safely here. I hope she wasn't a bother. Draylin, Brianna said, this is Namara. Be nice to her. He offered his hand. Pleasure to meet you. Namara shook his hand. The pleasure's mine. His grip was simple, almost gentle. There was no challenge in it, no macho need to demonstrate strength or dominance. She liked that. What happened? Draylin asked Namara, glancing nervously at her vigil uniform. Is my sister in trouble? Namara felt Brianna squeeze her hand and was fairly certain she knew what that meant. No, Namara said, no trouble. We just started chatting and realised we were both walking the same direction, so here we are. Hey, where's your cane? Draylin asked Brianna. Oh, Brianna said, dropped it. Couldn't find it again, sorry. She smiled innocently. Draylin sighed. Some idiot kid probably stole it. I'll get you a new one this afternoon, if you can handle school without it. Gives me an excuse to hide in the corner. She reached up and found Draylin. She pulled his head down so she could speak in hushed tones. Namara's special. Draylin looked confused. You know, Brianna continued, special. Realization dawned. He looked at Namara. Oh, special. You do know she's Uthlari, right? Brianna pushed him away. I said be nice. No offence, Draylin added for Namara's sake. Namara shrugged, little taken. I'm not deaf, I can pick an accent, Brianna said to Draylin. She wants to learn stuff. Stuff? Special stuff. Huh. Draylin stroked his almost beard. We can teach her, right? Brianna asked. I guess. Draylin looked at Namara apologetically. But we don't know much ourselves. We've had to learn from books. I have books, Namara said. Draylin's eyebrows shot skyward. Brianna cocked her head to one side. What sort of books? Draylin asked. Magic books, I think, Namara said. You think? Most of it's written in a language I don't know, Namara said, but there are notes in Uthlari that talk about magic. What's the rest of it written in? Draylin asked, clearly fascinated. Brianna moaned, Here we go. Namara shrugged. I'm not sure. I've never seen it elsewhere, and I've never had the guts to ask around. It's not Imperial script. Draylen scratched his forehead. I'd love to take a look at these books. I might be able to recognise the language at least. Well, Namara said, I keep them in my room at Vigil House. Maybe you could come and... Draylen interrupted. I'm not comfortable about going into Vigil House. Wouldn't it look suspicious? Namara thought about it. I can say that I'm tutoring you, maybe teaching you how to speak Othalari. The learned invader teaching the noble savage how to read and write? Namara raised her hands. I didn't mean, Draylen grinned. I know. I was just teasing. Your Othalari is actually really good, Namara added. Both of you. Actually, if anyone needs tutoring, it's me. I barely know a word of Therian. I'll teach you, Brianna beamed. I don't think she was being serious, sis, Draylen said. Why not? If she was going to be stuck in this place for the foreseeable future, it could be handy to know the native tongue. And who better to teach her than two native speakers? Actually, Namara said, I kind of am serious. If nothing else, it'd be nice to know what Aushki means. Draylen looked shocked. Did someone call you? Namara raised her hands. No, I just heard it somewhere. Oh, well, it means, one who fornicates with oneself. He leaned forward so his head was level with Brianna's, and it's not used in polite company. Then I need to teach her, Brianna smiled smugly, so she doesn't say any other bad words. Come on, let me teach her. Will you teach her to read Therian too? Draylen asked. Brianna punched him on the arm. That's not fair. Draylen grinned as he straightened up and looked at Namara. How about we both teach you, in exchange for letting us look at those books? Not in Vigil House, though. Where then? Namara asked. The school bell started to clang. Damn, Draylen said, I need to get to work, and you, he flicked Brianna's shoulder, need to get to school. But, Brianna started, I know a place, Draylen said to Namara. How about you come and find me after I finish work, around sunset? Where? Namara asked. Scribe's office. Draylen craned his head towards the council chambers. Nobody will notice one more watchman coming or going. Nevertheless, Namara thought, it was a risk. So far this had all been a lucky accident, but it was about to become a full-blown conspiracy. I'll be there, Namara said.